Welcome to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. This episode we're going to be talking about sacred lands versus divine money. And it has a lot to do with some of the controversies about pipelines and whether they're driven for what we really need or just driven for money. With me I have a couple of folks who have been very heavily involved with this issue. I have Byron Clemens, who is a St. Louis activist, and I also have Amber Duvall, who's with Earth Defense Coalition.
Correct. Fantastic.
Okay, now one of the things is, why should we be worried about pipelines at all? What's the issue there?
In my opinion, pipelines are just an outdated infrastructure. So in a lot of ways, we have all these large investments in this infrastructure, so we're not investing in any new solutions. So we're investing in more pollution and not more solutions. I think we know, too, with pipelines, they break. So with this outdated infrastructure, we also have a lot of outdated technology. And it's said to be the safest, means of transporting oil and natural gas at this time. But what we're failing to realize is that this is not the safest way of getting energy.
It might be called the least dangerous.
Right, absolutely, absolutely.
I mean, pipelines never blow up and kill 55 people, but like trains are other types of transportation, but they certainly, they can be very damaging. Now, Byron, what could you tell us a little bit about some of the issue about pipelines?
I want to thank our viewers for welcoming us into their homes. And Amber's absolutely right. It is an old technology that's past its time. And right now, we have no cohesive energy policy. So using these fossil fuels contributes to global weirding, is what I like to call it, because people understand that. If you talk to anybody, conservative, liberal, progressive, environmentalist, and say, how's the weather in your local clime? And almost everyone I know notices the changes. And we know that humans are contributing to that change. Fossil fuels, we have to get unhooked from them.
Because that creates the CO2 around the atmosphere that interferes with the way that the sun usually penetrates here.
And here we are, where Native Americans once again are on the front lines trying to defend their rights, but also the 10 million people who live downstream, which includes us. Our drinking water for the city of St. Louis, the drinking water for St. Louis County, all is largely from the Missouri River.
So we're talking about DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline.
That's correct. And that particular pipeline, the oil for that is destined to go to Asia, to China specifically.
So it's not going to make America more independent?
No, it won't impact us at our local service station at all, but it could impact on our water resources. Now, we also know that these pipelines have accidents all the time, and they've increased in the number of accidents they've had. More than 3,000 accidents since 1995, and these are significant accidents, not small ones.
We're not talking about leaking a few drops of oil. We're talking about our gas or whatever. We're talking about a big blowout.
In one of them, 150 miles away from the DAPL pipeline in North Dakota, 150 miles away, 165,000 gallons in just a few days into a creek and into a river, and that's in North Dakota itself. That's the record that we have, particularly this pipeline company, which our current president has invested in, and that really this issue is about greed and divestment from those banks. But we'll talk about that a little more later.
Okay, so one of the things about accidents with pipelines, they're different from accidents with other means of transporting fossil fuels. A pipeline is not going to explode, but when what the other ones are other like rail or truck transportation, that's not likely to go into a river. And so what are the particular concerns of a pipeline crossing?
Well, when I say pipelines, I mean not just fossil fuels and these extremely dirty oils like the shale oils of Keystone. You may notice that the Canadians did not want to build a pipeline going across Canada to Vancouver for their pipeline. They wanted it to go through the U.S. because they're willing to sacrifice our pristine environment to move that oil at a cheaper cost. There are accidents that involve explosions. There was a gasoline pipeline. So all those petroleum products are part of that private infrastructure, and I have to be very clear about this. This is private infrastructure, not public infrastructure. And we know right now there's a current debate at this time, as this is being broadcast, about budgets and trying to use budgets from federal funds on oil and fossil fuels on federal lands. That's not going to go anywhere, because we watched the price of oil plummet from $50 a barrel. Now it's lower than $8 as we are broadcast right now, lower than $8.
So the price is changing.
It's plummeting. And so the greed factor that was part of this originally isn't really going to work.
It's not going to make the profits like they thought it would.
No.
Okay. Now, Amber, you've been at DAPL, which is Dakota Access Pipeline. There's at multiple locations. You've been both in North Dakota and Iowa. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a little bit about what you did there and what happened? Okay.
In Iowa, we actually made an encampment in Keokuk, Iowa, where Dakota Access was boring underneath the Mississippi River. So Keokuk, to give you an idea, is basically at the southeast corner of Iowa, so top of Missouri, right at the Iowa and Missouri border, right along the Mississippi River. And we camped in a ditch for roughly 4 months and just began a resistance camp.
Now, what time period were you there?
We were there from August until late October. So
2016.
Yeah, okay. Correct. And so we were there. It started with one person, a local Iowan citizen. She realized what was happening, pitched a tent, and started moving access tires in front of Dakota Access, their access roads. And so with doing so, she kept risking arrests, this, that, and the other. She put a call out, we need people. People came, and people cared, and it was local people. In Iowa, we spoke a much different language than in North Dakota, because in Iowa, it was a lot eminent domain, farmers' land, and things like that was being taken away. As opposed to in North Dakota, it would be indigenous rights that we were speaking, or indigenous land and treaty rights. But in Iowa, what was really particularly concerning is only 2 families fought eminent domain to the state level, and they were still overturned. And it was because things like burial grounds on their land, or one family had an orchard in which generation after generation had planted trees in this orchard, and it was very sacred to them. Well, Dakota Access wanted to go right through it. The resolution to that was that they could drill under the land, they couldn't go on, break soil above. So
that is amazing. They used eminent domain, which is supposed to be for the public good,
correct,
for a private pipeline that would not increase the amount of oil available to Americans, but just increase the profits to a corporation.
And increase the risk.
Okay. Now, in just a few seconds, we're going to see a movie called Backhoe Lockdown. Could you explain to the viewers briefly what a lockdown is and why you would do it?
Sure. So this video is actually in Des Moines. So this is after they pulled the pipeline underneath the Mississippi River, and this is the last location that they're still drilling in Iowa. And so what these individuals are doing, they're running up to a construction site to deploy a lockdown, which would be when one of the water protectors uses a device in which they lock themselves around a piece of equipment in order to halt construction for a period of time.
So that slows down the construction. Okay,
yes.
We're going to take a look now at Backhoe Lockdown and be back in just a minute.
Oh, there's a river called Des Moines, and she flows softly tonight. There's a river called Des Moines, and she whispers softly at the moon, and she tells me when the drill is drilling, and she whispers that the night is gonna be cold, and she cries that the sky is tearing. There's a river called Des Moines. My name's Alex Henry Nichols. I'm walking down to a pull rig machine to a backhoe. It's trying to get a pipe under the river. The river's the same. The river's the same blood that's in our bodies as our mother. We're trying to shut down this machine. The whole capitalist system. the white supremacist system. They're trying to blow right through the ground just so they can make some more money. We can't let that happen. It's a system that targets indigenous people.
My name is Sage, and I'm walking down here to stop Apple from continuing to ruin this earth.
There's a little gnome with giant shoes and a beard down to his toes. He holds a portal between his fingers. You can up with a 5-string banjo. I think the Buddha said something like tuning a banjo is like tuning a river. You ever heard that one?
No.
I heard that one up in the hills every once in a while.
Welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. We're talking about sacred land versus divine money, because for a lot of people constructing pipelines across the United States, money is the most divine thing in their mind. With me, I have a couple of guests who have been heavily involved in resisting pipelines. I have Amber Duvall, who is with the Earth Defense Coalition, and I have Byron Clemens, who is a St. Louis activist. Now, Byron, could you tell us that the best-known pipeline struggle occurred at the end of 2016 and beginning of 2017, which was DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline. What were some of the issues that were involved?
First of all, and Amber mentioned this earlier, that this is a triangulation of several issues, but one of them is treaty rights, even sacred lands. The DAPL pipeline actually tore up a burial ground. That's one of the issues that two Sioux nations, both the Cheyenne River Sioux as well as the Standing Rock Sioux. In Lakota, there's a word, it says all my relations. It's ho matakiase, and that means all my relations. And it means not just us as human beings that we're all related, but we're related, the two-leggeds and the four-leggeds and the things that swim, the things that fly, the things that crawl on the earth. All of the creation is put there in harmony. And this process we're doing disrupts all of that. So these folks are defending their land, their nation, their spiritual beliefs, as well as the environment, their drinking water. And it's a clear violation of treaty rights going back to Fort Laramie in 1867. So we have all that with the fossil fuels and climate change. And so we have Native Americans on the front line. Most of us learned about this when Amy Goodman witnessed, as a good journalist, the horrible things that happened to the water protectors there. Dogs were set on them. They were hit with water cannons in the middle of winter. A woman nearly had her arm blown off with a explosive grenade that went off on her arm. And because Amy Goodman publicized that at the time and was arrested for it, it had the opposite effect of what the law enforcement had wanted, and often private security was the law enforcement. Then it became an international cause célèbre, and people got more involved. I've been up there twice, delivered food and wood and propane and winter camping goods, but once in 2016, in late November, early December, and then more recently in February, just before all this came down. People should understand that the protesters there were nonviolent and really spiritual.
Right.
A lot of praying.
Okay, well, got to keep in mind that though the Dakota Access is the best known pipeline, it's not the only one. There's many, many others. Amber, could you tell us, you've been involved in Diamond, or you know about Diamond Pipeline.
Sure.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
So the Diamond Pipeline runs from Cushing, Oklahoma to the Valero Refinery in Memphis, Tennessee. Most recently, actually, we just deployed an action in which we shut down the Valero Refinery, specifically related to the Diamond Pipeline. So the Diamond Pipeline is also a crude oil pipeline. It's running from a really controversial area, and it's receiving fracked oil from a part of Oklahoma. Oklahoma is having tons of issues right now with earthquakes and has been.
Haven't they zoomed upwards like a 300% increase in earthquakes or something like that?
I'm not positive on the number, but I know there's several dozen being documented per week on,
And there used to be almost none, like one
Correct.
or two a year.
Absolutely correct.
And it's not necessarily from the fracking process or the refinery, the extraction process. It's also from the byproducts. The water used in these processes are now stored underground, and so the water pressure is building up and pressing on fault lines. So it's activating things that might not have been activated for thousands and thousands of years. But that pipeline too, the Diamond Pipeline, runs through native land in Oklahoma. The action with the Valero Refinery, we deployed with two indigenous youth who are very passionate. One in which just met with council members of his tribe to see if they could retract the signatures or the approval for their property within the Diamond Pipeline.
Now, one of the others you mentioned was Sable Trail.
Correct.
Now, where is that?
Sable Trail runs from Alabama to Georgia down to Central Florida. So most prominently, it runs through basically north Central Florida all the way down to Central Florida, a couple miles south of Orlando. That's a natural gas pipeline, so different than the crude oil. It's a little bit bigger. It's a steel pipeline. It is said to be used for domestic use as well, but most likely going to be transported based on where it's going, and it feeds out into the Gulf. And also with natural gas, we mentioned this earlier, just the profit. It costs more now. I think it's about $4 to produce natural gas per MCF, which is million cubic feet. And I think domestically it sells for about $1.75 to $2, whereas in international markets it's reaching something on average like $13 per MCF.
So these are just two of the examples of many. Okay, now, Byron, could you tell us some of the bigger issues, some of the big issues such as First Amendment rights that the whole pipeline issues everywhere deals with?
At least 18 states have now moved forward. Some of them have been quashed already as we go to broadcast. Inspired by the protests that happened at the DAPL and other sites, there are state legislators who are trying to stop protesters and levying heavy fines, saying that people should forfeit their houses and property if they take part in First Amendment rights of protest. And that's shockingly bizarre to me and clearly unconstitutional, but that'll all have to be sorted out. But it's been used as an excuse. It does show how effective the protests have been. It does show how much it shakes up the people who are taking advantage of campaign contributions from these investors. At the same time, though, a more hopeful thing about this is that more than $635 billion has been divested. The city of Seattle, Portland, many customers of Wells Fargo.
A lot of people can do is to divest, their city or their school can divest from the oil.
And we want to encourage people to do that. That's really a front line that everybody can do. And not just quit if you have a Wells Fargo account. Don't just quit that account, but try and enter into a dialogue with them first and say, will you divest? And let them know why you want to divest. So there are big institutional accounts that are changing and also individual people. That will have an impact, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, let's take a break, and we're going to take a look at a short movie now called Toxic Dump Liberation, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Last time on Toxic Dump Liberation, a Mississippi Stand funeral procession ended at the DAPL Toxic Sludge dump site in Iowa, where Gold Star mother Neitha Morgan and Dan Truesdale of the Possibility Alliance locked down and blocked access to the site. Without the ability to offload the toxic sludge, DAPL cannot continue to drill underneath the Mississippi River. This is day 2.
People gonna rise like the waters. We're gonna shut this pipeline down. I hear the voices of my great-granddaughters saying, keep it in the ground. People gonna rise like...
Police, fire, private security, and a tow truck have all arrived on site. We are over 24 hours into our occupation, and while the police know about 2 of the lockdowns, they have yet to realize that there is a 3rd water protector locked under the trailer they are about to try to tow away.
The trailer roof is not sturdy. You're risking your own safety as well as everyone involved right now. Show me what a hero looks like. This is what a hero looks like. Show me what courage looks like. This is what courage looks like. Show me what courage looks like. This is what courage looks like. We will be thinking about you and praying for you.
The police have arrested Catherine, but the firefighters aren't prepared to remove any of the people locked down, so we're going to be able to hold the site for another night. Stay tuned.
In the ground. Keep it in the ground. Keep it in the ground.
Welcome back to Green Time. This episode is Sacred Lands versus Divine Money. I'm host Don Fitz, and with me I have Amber Duvall, and I also have Byron Clemens. We just have a short time left, Byron. What would you like the viewer to leave the viewer with?
Well, so there are these important battles. I love the title of this, but it really is a question of sacred ground and Mother Earth and the water that we all drink. The Native Americans and other people are on the front line of doing that, doing lockdowns at banks and other places. You don't have to do that. That's a choice that one can make and do. I've done it myself before, and I'll do it again if necessary. But you can also try and impact on the investors, the greed part of this. But it's not just some distant thing, a pipeline way up in North Dakota that doesn't impact on me. There are 10 million people who depend on this drinking water, including the citizens of the city of St. Louis and St. Louis County. That's our drinking water that people are defending.
that is amazing. It's not a distant issue for St. Louis.
It's right here. The confluence is just north of St. Louis. 80% of the city of St. Louis, their water comes through those water intakes. That's Missouri River water.
Well, let me just ask you this. What do you think the probability of a spill is?
It's highly probable. They have accidents all the time.
It's kind of constant.
And so we're not just looking after ourselves. It's not our greed. It's looking after the future generations, the children, the grandchildren.
Amber, what would you like to leave the viewer with?
Just kind of as Byron said, just because it is a pipeline up in North Dakota doesn't mean it doesn't affect you at home. And something that I've been really working on is intersectionality. So I think that there's a lot of different struggles, a lot of different oppressed people are facing, and I think environmentalism and this, the well-being of our Earth is in the middle and the heart of all of those movements. Because without an Earth, you can't have human rights, and vice versa. And we see this with a lot of movements. So I've been really just going out and getting to know people and what their struggles are, and standing next to them and learning from them. And I think that that's useful for the environmental movement as well as all the movements that St. Louis is facing right now.
Yeah, it is amazing how all of these things link together. The civil rights struggles, the respect of native cultures and native religion, and a failure of dominant religion to respect other religions, and the poisoning of people, poisoning of future generations. I find that it's all connected very heavily. Okay, I want to thank Byron Clemens for participating in the discussion. I want to thank Amber Duvall for participating. I want to thank our viewers for tuning us in, and please tune us in the same time next week.